I spent years building a life for my stepson. Then he publicly humiliated me twice, and his mother gave me an ultimatum. My name's Mark. I'm 52 years old, and I've spent the better part of my adult life building my own little slice of heaven, a high-end wine lounge in the heart of the city. It's the kind of place with dim lighting, leather chairs, jazz humming in the background, and a wine list that makes sommeliers nod in approval. I've always taken pride in the vibe we've cultivated, understated elegance, the kind of place where people come to talk, connect, unwind. About 3 years ago, I was in need of a new accountant. My last one had retired and, to be honest, he'd been phoning it in the last couple of years. I put out a discreet hiring notice through a few professional channels. I didn't want just anyone. I wanted someone sharp, someone who knew how to carry themselves, someone who could handle the kind of clientele we served without blinking. That's when Julia walked into my life. She showed up for the interview wearing a cream-colored blouse and a navy skirt, nothing flashy, but everything about her was put together. Her posture, her handshake, the calm tone in her voice. It wasn't just her resume that impressed me, although she had years of experience in private accounting, mostly for boutique firms. It was her presence. You don't meet people like that often. She carried herself like she belonged in any room, but didn't need to prove it to anyone. I hired her the next day. Julia slipped into the role effortlessly. My business accounts were cleaner within 2 weeks than they'd been in years. She didn't just do the numbers. She helped me reimagine how we tracked our revenue streams, implemented better payroll systems, even handled a couple of tricky tax issues I'd been dreading. But it wasn't just the professional side that got to me. We started having long conversations after hours. She'd stay back to finish work and I'd bring over a glass of something special, 1999 Pomerol once, a South African Syrah another night. We'd talk. About everything. About music, about books, about the world. And sometimes about her son, Trevor. He was 14 at the time, going through the awkward early teenage stage. Julia had him young, she told me that right away. She was upfront about being a single mother. She'd been divorced for years. No dramatic story, just a guy who hadn't been ready for the responsibility, she said. Julia didn't complain, didn't paint herself as a victim. Just laid it all out there. I liked that about her. I met Trevor maybe 2 months after Julia and I started seeing each other outside of work. I wasn't in a rush. Didn't want to be another fleeting face in his life, but eventually she invited me to join them for dinner at a quiet Italian place on a Tuesday night. He was quiet at first, polite, maybe a little wary, but smart, observant. I noticed the way he watched his mother when she talked, like he was always listening for something unsaid. Over time, Trevor warmed up to me. I took him to a Lakers game once, nosebleed seats, but he didn't care. He was just excited to be there. We'd started falling into this rhythm. The three of us going to dinner now and then, movie nights at their place, little things. Nothing forced. No big declarations. It just happened naturally. 18 months in, I proposed. It wasn't anything flashy. I didn't want that. We were sitting on my back patio, drinking a glass of wine, talking about the future, and I just asked. No speech. No ring hidden in dessert. I just said, "You think we should make this official?" She laughed, then cried, then said yes. That was Julia. Always a little unexpected, always genuine. We got married the following spring. It was a small ceremony. Her idea, not mine, but I came around to it. Just close friends, some of my staff, a few of her colleagues, and Trevor standing between us looking both proud and slightly annoyed to be in a suit. And that was the beginning of our life together. Trevor came to live with me full-time shortly after. His old school wasn't great, and we found a better one closer to my place. Julia moved in too, and for a while, everything felt like it was falling into place. That's how it started. After the wedding, life settled into a new rhythm. Julia moved in officially, Trevor started at his new school, and for the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel like a quiet showroom. It felt lived in. We made Sunday pancakes a thing. Julia always burned the first batch, and Trevor made a game out of rating each one. They laughed a lot, and I loved hearing it. I wasn't naive. I knew Trevor wasn't going to start calling me Dad overnight. I wasn't expecting that. But I wanted to earn that place in his life. I poured myself into it, not for show, not because I felt like I had to, but because I genuinely cared. I showed up for him in every way I could think of. Trevor was into soccer. Not casually, he lived and breathed the sport. So I went with him to every single one of his matches. Rain, wind, heat, it didn't matter. I was there in the bleachers, cheering him on. I didn't just watch either. I asked questions about the rules, about his position, about the players he admired. He liked that. I think it caught him off guard at first, but over time, He started opening up more, giving me pointers on who to watch, telling me stories about his teammates. I helped him with school too. He struggled a bit with math, and I'm no genius, but I hired a tutor and sat with him during sessions. Sometimes we'd stay up late working on assignments together. I'd make hot cocoa, and we'd spread his papers out on the dining room table. Julia would poke her head in, smiling, and I'd catch her watching us, this little half grin on her face like she wasn't quite sure how she got so lucky. Birthdays, holidays, family trips, I made sure he felt celebrated. I remember one weekend I surprised them with a cabin getaway in the mountains. Just the three of us. We went hiking, made a bonfire, played board games in the evening. Trevor said it was the best trip he'd ever had. That meant everything to me. And I wasn't stingy either. I know money isn't the same thing as love, but I also know what it means to a teenage boy when someone invests in the things he cares about. I bought him a custom gaming PC after he aced his finals one semester. He'd been dreaming about it for months. I spent nearly $2,000 on it, no hesitation. Then there were the sneakers. He wanted these limited edition Jordans, $500, and they sold out in minutes. I pulled some strings with a client who knew someone in retail and made it happen. The look on Trevor's face when he opened that box? Worth every penny. I wanted him to have the kind of support I never did at his age. To feel like someone was really in his corner, no matter what. But there was one part of the picture I could never quite fit into, and that was Shane. Shane was Julia's ex and Trevor's biological father. I only met him once, and even that was enough. The guy had the kind of presence that made your skin itch. Tall, wiry, eyes a little too bright, the kind of guy who always seems like he's vibrating with something unspoken. He had a past. Former alcoholic, anger issues, multiple incidents that ended with police reports and court hearings. That's how Julia got full custody in the first place. Shane had nearly gotten Trevor hurt once, left him alone in a locked car while he went inside a liquor store. Trevor was 6. Even after all that, Julia never cut him off completely. She believed Trevor needed a connection to his father, no matter how strained or limited it was. I didn't agree, not really, but I respected her decision. We had conversations about it, long, sometimes heated, but she always came back to the same point. He's still his dad, Mark. I won't take that away from him. So Shane stayed in the background. Not consistent, not stable, but present enough to remind Trevor that he existed. He'd call once every few weeks, maybe show up for an occasional dinner or a short weekend visit, always supervised. Julia made sure of that. But it still shook things up every time. Trevor would come back a little quiet, a little off, like he didn't know what to do with the emotions it stirred up. And I just had to sit with that. Keep showing up. Keep being there. Even if Trevor didn't always say it, I knew he saw it. Becoming a father when someone else already holds that title in a kid's mind. It's like walking into a house that isn't yours and trying to make it feel like home. You can furnish it, decorate it, keep the lights on, but you'll always wonder if the person you're doing it for really wants to live there. I'd started planning it months in advance. I wanted everything to be perfect. Trevor had been through a lot, and turning 21 was a milestone. I decided to host the event at my wine lounge. Not just because I owned the place, but because I could control the environment and give him something elegant, something elevated. We closed the lounge for the night, set up a private event with a guest list of about 30 people. Just close friends, family, and a few of Trevor's buddies from college. The decor was understated but beautiful. Candles, fresh-cut orchids, warm lighting, soft instrumental music playing in the background. I even brought in a special chef to design the hors d'oeuvres. Tuna tartare, truffle sliders, caviar on brioche, and a dessert bar with handmade chocolates and custom pastries with his initials. Because Trevor didn't drink, and because I didn't want alcohol to be the focus, I had the bartenders design an entire menu of non-alcoholic cocktails. They looked and tasted like the real thing, garnished with dehydrated citrus, herbs, and delicate ice cubes. They were served in proper glassware, and people loved them. Trevor was grinning all night, shaking hands, laughing with his friends. And me? I felt proud. I'd gone all out. I wore a tailored midnight blue suit that cost me $1,200. Silk blend, Italian cut, paired with a white shirt, no tie, just the right amount of elegance without being over the top. It fit like a second skin. I hadn't felt that confident in a long time. For the first hour or so, everything was perfect. Then Shane showed up. He wasn't on the guest list. Julia hadn't said anything about inviting him. I assumed, naively, that we were on the same page about that. But there he was, walking through the lounge doors with a beer in his hand. Yes, a beer. He brought his own, cracked open, already 3 drinks deep judging by the way he walked. His shirt was wrinkled, half untucked, and his face had that red flush that always came with the drinking. I caught Julia's eyes from across the room, but she looked away, like she hadn't expected him either, or maybe like she didn't want to deal with what came next. Shane walked right into the middle of the room, lifted his beer like he was toasting the crowd, and shouted, "My boy's finally a man." His voice echoed through the lounge. Conversations stopped. Trevor froze mid-sentence, his smile slipping. I walked toward Shane quickly, tried to keep it calm. "Hey man, this is a private event, we're keeping it alcohol-free tonight." He looked at me, eyes glassy, then laughed and said, "Yeah, well, you keep serving those little pretend drinks, I'll stick to the real stuff." Then he spotted the food table. Shane stumbled over and grabbed a handful of the sliders, stuffing 2 into his mouth, and tossing another across the room like it was a baseball. It hit one of the bartenders in the chest. Then he picked up a tray of water bottles, imported, glass, each one costing nearly $40, and knocked them over one by one. They clattered to the floor, the sound sharp and sudden, glass rolling and water soaking into the floorboards. People were staring. A few of Trevor's friends stepped back, whispering. One of the servers moved forward to clean it, but I stopped him. I didn't want this escalating. Shane turned on me again, his voice rising. "You think you can buy him with your suits and your fancy little club?" He gestured at my outfit, sneering. $1,200 for that? You look like a damn waiter." The words hit harder than I expected, not because they were clever, but because of the timing, the context, the sheer humiliation of being mocked like that in front of Trevor and everyone else. I looked at Julia again. She was standing by the corner of the room, arms crossed, not moving. Not saying a word. Not stepping in. Trevor finally walked over, his face red, his jaw clenched. "Dad, you need to go." Shane looked at him, grinned, and said, "You're welcome, kid," then shoved another appetizer into his mouth and turned toward the exit. He knocked over a small tower of dessert glasses on the way out. The sound of glass shattering rang through the lounge like a final insult. After he left, the room felt different. The air had changed. People tried to pretend like everything was fine, but it wasn't. Conversations were awkward. The music felt too loud. The waitstaff didn't know whether to keep serving or stop. Trevor walked out to the balcony and didn't come back in for 15 minutes. Julia followed him out, but I stayed inside, standing in the middle of the room in my now wrinkled suit, surrounded by spilled water, trampled sliders, and guests who weren't sure whether to leave or stay. The evening was ruined. I'd spent weeks planning, thousands of dollars, every ounce of energy I had, and it ended like that. And the worst part? Julia never said a word to Shane. Not one word during the entire thing. Not before. Not after. After that disaster of a birthday party, I hoped things would settle. I thought maybe after a few days, Trevor would cool down, see that I'd done everything I could to give him a special night, realize that what happened wasn't my fault. But what came instead was silence. It started subtly. Trevor stopped coming down for breakfast, even when I made his favorite, blueberry waffles with extra syrup. He'd leave his plate in the sink if he ate at all. At first, I told myself he was just embarrassed. Maybe he felt caught between two worlds. His biological father, unpredictable and volatile, and me, the man trying to hold everything together. But then the silence turned into distance. He stopped talking to me altogether. He'd come home from class, close the door to his room, and barely make eye contact when I passed him in the hallway. I tried reaching out, offered to take him to lunch, suggested we go to a game, even just hang out and watch a movie like we used to. Nothing worked. He'd mumble a no or pretend he didn't hear me. Every attempt to connect landed flat. Then came the aggression. One evening, I'd come home a bit later than usual, an issue with a supplier at the lounge, and I walked in to find Trevor standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, clearly waiting for me. His face was tight, like he'd been holding in a storm all day. I asked him if everything was okay. He just stared at me for a second, then said, "You're never going to give up his place, are you?" His voice was low, bitter. I didn't know how to respond. I asked him what he meant, tried to clarify, but he cut me off. "You act like you're my dad. Like you can replace him. But you're not. You never will be." Then he walked away, slammed the door to his room, and didn't come out for the rest of the night. That moment gutted me. I'd never claimed to be his father. I never tried to erase Shane. All I'd ever done was show up, consistently, even when it was hard. I wasn't trying to take anyone's place. I just wanted to be someone he could count on. I went to Julia, still shaken from the confrontation, hoping she'd talk to him, or at least talk to me. I told her what he'd said, how he'd been acting. I laid it all out. She sat on the edge of the bed, arms wrapped around herself, and after a long pause she said, "He's a teenager, he's just worried." That was it. No support. No real conversation. No acknowledgement of how it felt to be accused like that by someone I'd spent years trying to love and protect. I stood there, waiting for more, some kind of reassurance or partnership in this mess, but she didn't offer it. From that point on, the house felt different. Cold. Divided. Trevor and I passed each other like strangers, and Julia, she became quiet too, distracted. If I brought up the tension, she'd change the subject or ask me to give him time. But the time just stretched. Days became weeks, and the distance kept growing. I started to feel like a guest in my own home. And the worst part was knowing I had no idea how to fix it. A few months after the silence settled into our house like fog, Trevor graduated college. Despite everything that had been happening between us, I wanted to show him that I was proud. Genuinely proud. I didn't care about the tension, the words he'd said, the cold shoulders. This was a big deal, and it deserved to be recognized. So I threw him a party. I booked out the entire upper floor of a modern downtown restaurant with panoramic views of the city. It wasn't flashy, but it was elegant. Live music, custom menu, a cake with his college logo in perfect detail. I had a slideshow made with pictures of him from childhood through his college years. I even made sure to include a few of him and Shane. Not to prove anything, but because I knew those memories mattered to him. Trevor showed up in a sharp gray suit, looking older than I remembered, like the world had already carved a few lines into his face. I thought maybe, just maybe, this could be a reset. A moment where we could put the last few months behind us. The first hour of the party went smoothly. People were mingling, music was playing, the food was a hit. Then, as I walked back from the bar with a tray of drinks, I saw Trevor standing stiffly in the middle of the room, jaw tight, his eyes locked on someone I hadn't seen come in. Shane. Again. I looked at Julia, who was standing beside him with that same detached expression she wore during the birthday debacle. Shane was already halfway through the crowd, wearing a wrinkled button-down, hair slicked back, clearly already a few drinks deep. I moved quickly, intercepting him before he reached the main table. I kept my voice low and firm. You weren't invited. This is a private event. He smirked and said, my son's graduating. I have a right to be here. I told him to leave. He shrugged and stepped back, but the damage was already done. I turned to look at Trevor, who was now walking toward me, his face flushed with anger. Loud enough for the entire room to hear, he shouted, You're not my father. You're nobody. Just my mom's husband with money. The room went dead silent. Every fork froze midair. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Eyes turned toward me. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I looked at Julia, standing just a few feet away. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She didn't even blink. Trevor turned and walked out. Shane followed. A minute later, Julia quietly excused herself and disappeared after them. And I stood there alone, in a room I'd paid for, surrounded by people pretending not to stare, trying to process the fact that the second time I tried to celebrate him, it ended worse than the first. The final blow came just a few months after the graduation fiasco. Trevor had been accepted to Stanford for his graduate program. It was a huge achievement. I was genuinely impressed, despite everything. Stanford didn't hand out admissions easily, and I knew he'd worked hard for it. But with that acceptance came a price tag. $85,000 a year, not including living expenses. I found out the way I found out most things at that point, indirectly. Julia told me over dinner one night, almost casually, like she was mentioning a change in the weather. Trevor got into Stanford, she said, and waited. I congratulated her, asked how he was feeling about it. She shrugged and said, He's proud. But nervous about the cost. I knew what was coming before she said it. Sure enough, the next day Trevor showed up at the house, stood across from me in the living room, and said flatly, I need you to pay for Stanford. It's $85,000 a year, and I'm not taking on that kind of debt. I looked at him, really looked at him, and the only thing I could think about was the party. The words. The public humiliation. You said yourself that I'm nothing to you, I replied calmly. So let your dad pay for it. His face went blank for a second. Then he turned and walked out without another word. That night, Julia came into my office after I'd finished a call with my supplier. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, voice tight. Either you pay for Trevor's tuition, or we get a divorce. Just like that. No conversation. No compromise. No concern for everything that had happened in the past year. It wasn't a question. It was an ultimatum. So there we were. Julia standing in the doorway of my office, arms crossed, jaw set like she had rehearsed the line a dozen times in front of a mirror. Either you pay for Trevor's tuition, or we get a divorce. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at her for a few seconds and said, Okay, let's get a divorce. She blinked like she hadn't expected me to call her bluff. I stood up, walked past her, and started making calls. My lawyer had everything filed and ready within the week. The house was mine. I bought it years before I ever met Julia. The lounge was mine too. Every asset, every account, every inch of property was protected. She knew that. She had signed the prenup herself, without pressure, in front of her own attorney. There was no room for argument, no loophole, no leverage. So I told them both, Julia and Trevor, that they had 30 days to vacate. I didn't shout. I didn't slam doors. I just laid it out, clearly, legally, and without emotion. I gave them a check to cover a month of temporary housing. Nothing more. When the day came, Julia didn't say much. She packed quietly. Trevor didn't help. He barely looked at me. No surprise there. I watched from the study window as they loaded their things into a moving van. Julia glanced up once, eyes empty, not angry, just defeated. And then, a week later, the act began. First it was a text from Trevor. Short, vague, no real apology. Just, I've been thinking. Maybe we could talk sometime. Then Julia sent an email. Long, emotional, filled with carefully chosen words. I know things were said in anger. I miss our life. I miss you. She asked if we could sit down and have dinner, maybe go over what went wrong. I didn't respond. 2 days after that, they showed up at the lounge. I saw them through the tinted glass before they even stepped in. Julia had on that soft smile she used to wear when she wanted something. Trevor kept his head down. They walked in like nothing had happened. She said she wanted to talk. That they were sorry. That everything had just gotten out of hand. That Trevor never meant what he said. But I was no longer fooled. I told them I appreciated the gesture, but the damage had been done. I told Julia I hoped she found peace. I told Trevor that words matter, especially the ones you choose to shout in front of a room full of people. Then I wished them well and walked away. After the dust settled, Julia and Trevor moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of the city. It wasn't in a bad area, but it was a far cry from the home they used to live in. From what I heard through mutual acquaintances, Trevor got a job at a home appliance store. Nothing glamorous, just a steady retail position unloading boxes, stocking shelves, dealing with customers. He wasn't thrilled, but he stuck with it. Julia struggled more. She bounced between temp agencies and online job boards, sending out resumes to firms that didn't call back. She had burned a few bridges during the years she worked for me and never really kept up with professional contact. Without a glowing recommendation or a stable network, she found herself sidelined in a market that moved fast and didn't care about her excuses. The last I heard, she was doing some part-time bookkeeping for a friend's startup that couldn't afford to pay her regularly. Meanwhile, my life shifted in ways I didn't fully expect. The house, once filled with tension, voices behind closed doors, footsteps I could recognize by their pace and weight, became mine again. I had the entire place gutted. Got rid of every piece of furniture Julia had chosen. New floors, new paint, new art on the walls. I redid the kitchen, opened up the living space, turned the spare room into a studio where I could play music again, something I hadn't done in years. The bedroom was stripped down to bare essentials. No memory foam mattress from our registry, no throw pillows, no monogrammed blankets. I wanted nothing from that part of my life. I started sleeping better. I cooked for myself, traveled more, stayed out late without worrying who was waiting or who wasn't speaking to me. I spent weekends at the lounge, testing new menu ideas, talking with guests, reconnecting with the parts of myself I had ignored while trying to hold that family together. And most of all, I lived freely. Without walking on eggshells. Without trying to earn affection that wasn't real. Without pretending things were okay just because I wanted them to be. So that's where I am now. Alone, yes. But not lonely. Free. And finally, without falsehood.